And we're live. So, to those of you in the chat, I hope you see us now because we just appeared on screen. My name is Claire. I'm the event coordinator at Village Books in Bellingham and Linden, Washington. I'm delighted to be here for this evening's event. And thank you to all of you who have shown up and who have been chiming in on the chat. It's wonderful to see so much love in the room. So thank you all for coming tonight. A few things to consider about Crowdcast or just an online event in general. If you're hearing an echo, make sure you only have one window open in your browser, or turn down the volume of your computer, or plug in some headphones. If you put in some headphones, just some simple earbuds, that should take care of any echo that you're hearing. There's also a green button that says follow in the upper right-hand corner of the screen. If you click on follow, you will see the events that we have coming up at Village Books. We have lots of events coming down the pike, so please take a look at what we've got going on. We do not let a thing like a pandemic slow us down. So we are continuing our robust programming that you're used to at Village Books. And also, to those of you who kicked in a few dollars at registration to contribute to the Village Books event programming, we really do appreciate it. Thank you so much. We're delighted that we can continue to provide this programming for free. It is very generous of you to donate a few dollars at registration. And to those of you who didn't, that's just fine too. Like I said, we're happy that we can provide this free programming. If at any time during the event tonight you feel like you want to ask a question, you can do that two ways. The way that I would love it for you to do it is if you look at the bottom of the screen, it says ask a question. If a question occurs to you, you can go ahead and click on ask a question. A dialog box will pop up. You type your question in there, and then we'll just hold it there until we get to the Q&A period. You can also type your questions in the chat too, if that's what you're more comfortable with. I do want to remind you that our virtual readings gallery is a safe space. Any user who is exhibiting offensive, hateful, or inappropriate behavior will be dismissed from the event immediately. Another important button on this screen is this one right here in the center that says Purchase Kabul Conscript here. If you click on that, that is a direct link to the Village Books website and to the event page for this particular event where our authors' books are listed. We encourage you, if you're inspired this evening by anything that you hear and wish to support the authors and a beloved independent bookstore, we encourage you to click on that link and make a purchase of the books there. So thank you. Let me think. Oh, if you happen to be watching this on YouTube as a recorded event, if you look down below in the description, you can also see a link to our bookstore. So thank you. All right. And now for our presenters. So to moderate our conversation tonight, we have Jerome Fitzgerald. He's an author, excuse me, Jay Fitzgerald.
Well, that's Jerome's good too.
Okay. An author, well, it's your pen name.
It makes me feel like I'm in trouble, so that's good.
Oh, okay. He's an author and boat builder. He resides in Vancouver, BC. His published works include Seasteading, A Life of Hope, and Freedom on the Last Viable Frontier. And so now for our featured author. He's an author, playwright, and musician. Mike Rostron was raised in Oregon and lived for 25 years in Alaska. The last 20 years, he has resided in Whatcom County, Washington, and during the summer of 1973, Rostron was a Peace Corps trainee in Kabul, Afghanistan. He's the author of this book right here, Cape Decision, Revenge and Remorse in the Alaskan Wilderness, and tonight he's here to present his brand new book, The Kabul Conscript. So please join me with thunderous applause in welcoming, what are we doing? Jay Fitzgerald and M.E. or Mike Rostron.
Right. Let's see, what am I seeing? Ah, there we are.
Whoa.
Hi.
Amazing.
Hi, Jay.
How you doing, Mike?
I'm doing well. It's good to speak to you. Jay is coming to us from up north in Vancouver. So this is an international event, right?
It is. And considering that seafaring and literature has something to do with that, and I'm appropriately down here on the Fraser River on my boat, hanging out. So it's a dark and stormy night here, and so we can set the mood a little bit.
That's true.
I was thinking, you and I have chewed the fat a fair amount in the past. And I believe you and I have had this conversation, and if not, we'll have it again. But I for myself, I've always found it remarkably interesting if one starts to do a survey of the most important writers in Western culture, at least, how many of them have a connection to seafaring. Like it's very disproportionate. Like if you start going down the list of many of the most influential writers or thinkers or philosophers, they stand out unusually represented.
Yeah, I mean,
which should be somebody's doctoral thesis, but that that in itself, like I think, one of the things that is important to tell us, perhaps, especially in the context of the books that you have just written, most of which wrapping around this character by the name of Conrad Slocum, why it is that you would choose such a name like that to represent your character, and what those obvious influences mean to you. How's that?
Well, you've dug pretty deep right at the beginning. I want to say hi to everybody that's out there, and thanks for joining us, and thank Claire especially for such a nice welcome and introduction.
Indeed.
Jay's getting to the heart of the matter here. I created this character obviously from one of my favorite writers, Joseph Conrad. And also, some people here might not know that Joshua Slocum was the first man to sail around the world single-handedly in the late 1800s. And this name just popped into my head as a great character name when I was creating these books. So I hope to see Conrad go through some other adventures. I should say, I don't think Claire said anything about this, but the Kabul Conscript is actually sort of a prequel to the book I released last year, which is Cape Decision. And it occurs 28 years earlier, but it involves some of the same characters, including, of course, the protagonist, Conrad Slocum. But I have to say, I created both books at the same time in my mind. I probably started the Kabul Conscript slightly earlier. And as I was writing it, it came to me, I'd love to see how these characters behave when they're middle-aged, because I was writing about characters that were in their 20s with the Kabul Conscript. And so I essentially wrote both books at the same time. And getting back to your point, Conrad is a sailor, even though he finds himself on dry land when he's in Afghanistan, of course.
Excellent. How do you, it's interesting too, because I equate both Conrad the writer and Slocum with a certain kind of tragic heroism. Without perhaps giving out too much detail of the plot, or as much as you're comfortable. We don't need the spoilers. Do you feel that that's an important element that should be read into your books, or am I reading too much into them?
Well,
especially in the context of middle age.
Scripted, because I sure didn't expect that question. So, boy, I have to think about that. Well, obviously, Cape Decision is a tragic story, a very tragic story. And in fact, it's not giving too much away since it's right on the back cover, that a woman, a couple's son dies in prison, and the woman has the last chapter in the book. So she's a very important question, and it's definitely a family tragedy that affects everyone in the family. And I'm not going to give away the plot, but let's just say that the options, this touches on something that interests me, actually. The options for women, at least in our society, for any kind of vengeance or revenge or any kind of resolution seem to me to be in some ways tougher than for men. Men have a way of being able, or it's at least culturally approvable at some level for men to maybe duke things out or have some sort of violent encounter that sort of resolves an issue. Not that women can't be violent too, but I think in some ways the Kabul Cape decision, that's one of the things I approach in it, is the difference between the way the wife and the husband react to the death of their child. And the book is a whole lot more than that. On a superficial level, it's, I hope, just a rousing tale of adventure in Southeast Alaska. And if any of you have been there, and I know some of you looking at this list have, it's an incredible place. Jay, just as I recall, just got back from a venture north on his sailboat up into some of those fjords, which are very similar up in BC. And they're going back to your question, which I see I've wandered from a little bit. Yes, Cape Decision is certainly tragic. Conrad Slocum, I would say, is a tragic character in that. Now, 28 years earlier, when the Kabul Conscript occurs, he's a very young man, and we don't really know what he's going to turn out to be in middle age. And so, not that you couldn't read the books in any order, but I suggest those of you that are interested in this tale maybe start with the Kabul Conscript and meet these characters in their 20s. And then, if you like it, go on and see how they develop in their 50s.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, I mean, that comes to mind to me because if I think of either Conrad or Joshua Slocum, it conjures imagery perhaps of Lord Jim, for example. So you have a young man who experiences tragedy and in the rest of his life into middle age is an attempt to recover from that. And to a large degree, same thing in Josh Slocum, who as a young man was a sailing captain, of course, but not a very successful one, and had lost, I think, 3 ships before he took off by himself. So in both cases, there's this strong desire for both of those characters, and I can see that perhaps in your thinking too, of some kind of compensation for something that had happened in the past. And that's an interesting theme to borrow on. Right? I'm
very influenced by Joseph Conrad, Thomas Hardy, Lawrence Durrell, writers that I admire. Not that I'm not influenced in some modern writers too. I mean, I love Cormac McCarthy, and I'm a sucker for Thomas Pynchon. I mean, yeah, I think I've read Gravity's Rainbow 2 or 3 times.
Sure.
So it's not that but I'm very influenced by what I call, for lack of a better term, realistic fiction. And part of the fun of writing Cape Decision and the Kabul Conscript was the research. And I spent hundreds of hours researching both of those books because it's important to me that there be that the kind of book I like to read, you're reading along and you just stop and you got to go to Wikipedia or Google Maps. And I like it to be geographically accurate, historically accurate. For people that are at all interested in Afghan history, I'm absolutely accurate in the way things, in the political stuff that goes on there, and the timeline. What is fictional is the interactions that, for example, I have with one of my characters has with General Daoud, which I make up. But it is a fact that on the date of that coup in 1973, it was his birthday. It was the general's birthday, and the coup occurred on his birthday. And so I have a scene in there, not to give anything away, where one of my characters is talking to the general and saying, well, on your birthday, of all things, this occurs. So yeah, that's a roundabout way of saying, like all authors, I'm very influenced by authors that I really, truly admire. And I suppose, like you, I know you're like me, Jay, you read a lot of nonfiction. And when I'm preparing to write something like this, geez, I'll read, book after book of nonfiction, research. So hopefully, apart from a hopefully interesting cast of characters and plot, they might even pick up a few things about geography and history.
That's excellent. Well, I mean, it's one of the things that I find, perhaps I'm going to make a broad generalization that's probably not very fair, but it seems for me, a lot of the fiction that I, or at least attempt to read, I gravitate towards more classical or older fiction, because I think it has a tendency to be more acutely aware of a historic context. And I think that historic context is something that a lot of modern fiction has chosen to ignore, unfortunately. But obviously, you're making a real attempt to create a context for your books here. I mean, there's a significant timeline, 50 years.
I was a bit shocked when they classified the Kabul Conscript as historical fiction, because maybe it gives away my age, but 1973, I mean, I remember it pretty well, but I think that's now historical fiction.
Wow.
Yeah, so much of what has happened in the United States since then turns on that single event, that particular coup in July of 1973, which really changed the world in a lot of ways. It led to 5 years later, the Russians coming in and wiping out General Daoud's entire family. Daoud, excuse me, is how you pronounce it. And that was only revealed 35 years later. His grave site was only revealed 35 years later. They kept that secret for 35 years. But yet Russia was brought down, the USSR was brought down by their adventures, partially by their adventures there. And we've been involved in Afghanistan for how many years now, you know? And that all
20.
And that all pretty much started in 73, the coup, 78. They came in and wiped out. Daoud wasn't as wise as as the king who left. when the coup occurred, the king just happened to be in Italy in his, and so his palace was empty, and Daoud, who had the loyalty of the forces there, just kind of came in and just took over just in one night, you know. So, but he wasn't smart enough to do that in 78. He made a stand, and he and I don't know, maybe 30 people in his family got wiped out. So, very sad story there.
Boy, no doubt. I mean, you know, like you're quite the multidisciplinarian artist, right? So I mean, that's your broad palette over there.
We could have just played guitar through this whole thing.
Well, yeah. But I mean, you know, one of the things that, again, that you and I have talked about, and initially when I think I heard you mention this particular perspective, I didn't take a lot of it, but I've come to take it pretty seriously, and that is your statement that art, or at least good art, is always prescient. All right, and I think that's an astute. Yeah, yeah, you've told me that a lot, and that's an astute observation. And I'm wondering, in the creative process of writing these books, that there is a future that you are anticipating, that these are a statement or some kind of I don't know.
Yeah, you know, I probably made that statement perhaps when we had a drink or two.
No way.
I think it is. I think art is prescient, and I think that goes for all kinds of different forms of art, whether you're talking about writing or you know, sculpture or music or anything. There is you're sensitive to things that are going on around you in a funny way. I wasn't trying to make any kind of political or social statements necessarily with these books. I mean, first and foremost, they're books of plot and character, I believe. But I will admit I was up to something, certainly. Cape Decision. Some people here know that I've written a couple of theater pieces and put on a musical in 2013 with the aid of a local director, Christopher Key. And so I'm a big fan of, like, you know, Greek literature and Greek theater and stuff. And I couldn't avoid in Cape Decision using some names and some themes from, I mean, you could read it straight through and as a plot driven novel or whatever, but I was up to a few things, and I'm not going to give that away because astute readers will pick up some of it, as I know you have, Jay. The Kabul Conscript, I think what I tried to do when I was writing that is put myself into that headspace of being 21 again, being 21 and being in a place that at that time, for Eastern Europeans at least, was the equivalent of what Mexico was for adventurous young Americans in the 50s and say early 60s. So I remember I was 21 when I was there, and I remember that, and I tried to write as though, well, of course I'm omniscient, I use third person, you know, but I tried to write it more as though that was my knowledge. That was the circle of my experience, was being a 20-something-year-old, right? I don't know if I succeeded at that, but I allowed my head to expand a bit more in Cape Decision and try to write as though I had, because I do have more world experience. I think it is true that a writer really can't write in the moment well. You have to write after the moment. You have to have, I mean, it's a truism that you experience something and later on you come back and then regurgitate it in some form as fiction, right?
Well, yeah, no doubt. I mean, I asked the question because the theme of revenge, and especially revenge against abstract authority, perhaps.
Excuse me.
Abstract authority, perhaps, is an object of revenge. I mean, certainly there's personification of that, but fairly abstract.
You might have caught something there in Cape Decision, because Conrad, as you'll read, he has an odd ethical point of view. His point of view is I guess I would say pre-Christian. He looks at revenge and vengeance more like I wouldn't say primitive person, but a sort of a pre-Christian pagan would. And that's just as a result of his upbringing, which I haven't given a lot of his backstory away in these two books, because I intend to write a couple more books in this series, during which, folks and potential readers, you will get more of Conrad Slocum's very interesting backstory, I promise you. So I know I've avoided kind of your main question. I sort of danced around it. And it's because trying to think on my feet, or on my seat, I should say here, I'm not sure how to really get into that without giving away too much of the thoughts of the book. So yeah, I'm treading lightly a little bit.
You're treading lightly. It's too personal.
So actually what I was going to do is say, this would be a good segue, since we've talked about sailing a little bit here. I don't want people to forget that Jay's book Seasteading is available also, and I hope everyone that's interested does buy the book from Village Books rather than from a name I won't mention, another large distributor. If you can, support your local bookstores, because especially in these times, they really need your support. But Jay's book, Seasteading, this is something we talked about. We both sailed a lot together. And when I first met Jay, I built a boat up in Alaska, and I sailed it down to Washington in 2002 when I moved down here. And as I still remember the day I arrived in the Bellingham Harbor and picked up my slip. And Jay was probably like the first or second person I met, probably that same day. And we've gone on quite a few sailing adventures since. And so when I found out he'd written some sailing books, I was, of course, very curious. It's definitely worth your time, whether you're a sailor or not, to check out Seasteading. So I'm going to put in a plug for you there.
If you enjoy a preachy polemic, it'll be right up your alley.
Well, yeah, it's nonfiction, that's for sure.
Yeah, and to some degree, that was art that was somewhat prescient, anticipating a future that now we're experiencing firsthand. So,
yeah.
Unfortunately.
Well, we're both being vague and dancing around. But
Yeah.
I will say that my next project, Jay, is nonfiction.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And are you going to tell us where that's headed?
I'll give you a little hint. A couple of years ago, my sister, one of my sisters, I don't know if she's on here or not tonight, found a box of papers that my great-grandfather had left and had been lost for about 30 years. We knew that he was working on a memoir. He was a stagecoach driver in Yellowstone Park at the turn of the century, of the last century, before cars came in. And we didn't think he'd ever finish this autobiography, but in fact, it turned out it was like 110,000 words, and he had finished it. And so I've spent the last year or so digging through that. He wrote it out in longhand in pencil, which luckily he has a very legible hand. And anyway, that's sort of my next project is going to be getting that out as a memoir. And especially people that are interested in turn of the century Yellowstone Park will probably be interested in it. I've talked to the past historian of Yellowstone Park, who was historian there actually for, I don't know, 30 years or something. He says it's the only thing he's ever seen written by an actual stagecoach driver now from the park. So, it might be interesting, and it's sort of, I tend to have 2 or 3 projects going at once. That's just the way I approach things. If I get held up on one project, and then I'll just go over to the other one. So I've started another book in the Conrad Slocum series, and I'm actually, I think, fairly well into it. But at the same time, I'm working on this other nonfiction project, and I hope to bring it out next year, maybe with Village Books.
That's interesting to me because in looking at your material, I don't know if this is conscious or deliberate on your part, but you are framing your narratives in pretty severe environments typically. I mean, Afghanistan, Alaska, and certainly the Rockies are pretty iconic environments or placings for your plot to exercise itself, and to the point where they're almost so iconic that they're almost personifications of ideas in themselves. And I wonder if that's something that you are playing on consciously, or because it comes through that way. I mean, the Alaska backcountry has a personality.
Here's an interesting thing that has occurred to me, and I've been lucky enough, and I've heard other authors talk about it. Maybe you've even experienced it. There are times when something rises out of your subconscious, and if you write long enough and kick at it enough and pound at the door long enough and work and allow it, I think it must come from dreams or something. I've had experiences that have popped up while writing both of these books where suddenly something just made sense to me. And back to the geography, and then it just sort of, I won't say it wrote itself, there's always the process, but there was a flow that people experience that have worked in any art form. When you're in the flow, when you're in the moment, when you're jamming and you're on guitar, playing music, whether you're painting, there are moments when the flow comes, and it's because the subconscious is sort of maybe taking over. That has happened to me now with respect to Alaska. As you know, from sailing in those fjords, it does have a personality, and it will take you over if you're up there by yourself long enough. There's something about it. There's a cougar on the front of that Cape Decision, because the cougar is a more obvious metaphor, but yeah, I think you're right. I think the country itself becomes almost a character, the actual geography of it. That's a great observation.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and I would say that's a common theme of any writer that I can think of that comes from a nautical background. Like the ocean, the sea itself has or for myself, like, I mean,
more nautical. Thomas Hardy was great at portraying the the fictional but really factual English countryside. Same thing.
Jack London comes to mind.
London, of course, yeah.
So like, I mean, a lot of that for that there's a personality. Well, I mean, to follow on that, if we were going to take for a moment Afghanistan as this personified character, or Alaska as this personified character, because those are your choices.
It both start with me. Maybe it was that simple.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, you lived in both of those places for a reason, right? So, like, I'm wondering what is the narrative of those choices, and how does that play out in the book? Like, what is the essential message that comes from the structural placement of the plot in those geographic locale? Is that too abstract?
Yeah,
I think it's interesting because it stands out to me.
But I would say with Cape Decision, it's almost like if you've read any Joseph Campbell mythology,
Sure.
which I'm sure I know you have, or if anybody else has, there's the hero's journey, and it's an old theme, an age-old theme, as old as language, maybe older than language, and to a certain extent, Cape Decision follows the hero's. I mean, he's an anti-hero for some. I hope I created a character that some people will think is absolutely immoral, and other people will think is completely ethical and moral. I hope people disagree on that. If they do, I've succeeded. I mean, if they ban the book, I've really succeeded, right? But no, it is sort of like the hero's voyage. He's a bit Ulysses, right? I mean,
sure.
You caught that. I'm sure. I didn't. I think it's somewhat obvious, and I didn't try to cover it up.
Mm-hmm.
I was inspired, at least at some level, by mythology when I wrote that. Now, the Kabul Conscript was. No, I think the Kabul Conscript, the one thing that excuse me, I've got a little cold. It's not COVID. A couple people in my family have been checked, but the Kabul Conscript, I was more consciously writing about a coming of age story, I suppose you'd say. People in their 20s, especially men, I think. It seems to me women are maybe some people would disagree, but it seems to me women are usually more mature at 21 than men are. So in that story, I tried to show how people in a place far from home, under stress, hopefully at some level grew in some manner. I'm not a big proponent of this sort of standard arc that you see in so many books. There's the arc that goes, that he has trials, the character has trials, this and that and the other thing, and he overcomes them, and then at the end learns something incredible and maybe dies, maybe he or she dies or whatever. But it's hard to get away from an arc that's similar in some ways to that. We're used to novels presenting a story in a certain way. And so at the end of the Kabul Conscript, I'm hoping that you see that the characters have, well, at least matured some, and David Stuckrath, who is the other main protagonist, he definitely suffers a bit and is mortified, and hopefully the guy grows, because I mean, really, he's an example of a 21-year-old who really has a lot to learn, and he's placed in a stressful situation, and the people around him, I think, help him learn some things. Now, I'm not. See how I'm not giving away any.
Yeah, well, I mean, no, you're doing good. It's very guarded. It's excellent, because it leads me into the other question that I was going to ask you, because I know, again, in our conversations that we've had, and I can see it in these books as well, is one of the core attributes that you associate with a mature individual is having a flexible and intelligent relationship with honesty and truth, meaning that there is a kind of truth that makes sense in an immature mind, and the kind of honesty that makes sense in an immature mind. And as one matures, that becomes a more plastic and more humane notion. And I can see that in your characters. Now, that's contrasted a little bit with the character of the environment, because the environment, of course, is honest, severely honest all the time. All right. And in a lot of ways, it almost acts, not to give anything away, as this judge and witness of events that happen. Right.
In Cape Decision, for sure.
Yeah.
You know, I don't like to get too heavy-handed with themes, but I am, as an author, if people read my works, and I suspect this will last as long as I write, I'm very concerned with aspects of how people lie, tell half-truths, prevaricate. The English language has so many words about dissembling or outright lying, and I'm very interested in some ways, I think that defines an adult. You grow up, you know, you're told a lot of funny little stories about Santa Claus or whatever, and the Tooth Fairy, whatever. But as you grow up, you kind of learn that direct honesty isn't as always appropriate. And it's kind of a theme in my writing. I can see that looking back. I don't think I was so much conscious of it, but I can see that, oh, I almost forgot. You were talking about the Kabul Conscript, and I almost forgot. Claire, I think we should show those pictures before it gets too much later, because I think people would maybe like a break from our dialogue. And we'll just show, I just have a half dozen here. Let's take a look at it. These pictures are a little washed out because I took these in 1973 when I was in Kabul. And I had to scan them from slides. The reason I put this one here is because this is looking at the apartment that I stayed in while I was living in Kabul. And it rained about once, maybe twice the whole summer. And this was so exciting that I had to take a picture of it, because it's, you know, it's a very dry place. It's at about 6,000 feet, a semi-desert area. But you can see where we lived, the little shops, which were also below us. You can even see a guy walking up on top, I think, there. And these shops and this bazaar, this little sort of mini bazaar, opened every morning about 5 o'clock. They woke us up without fail. And we bought a lot of our supplies down here, or I should say our servant and hired cook bought a lot of these supplies right down locally here. They called it the toilet paper bazaar, because in Afghanistan, this was the one place that probably had the best selection of paper products that you could buy in Kabul. So, but it really had everything. You could show the next one, Claire. This is typical of the time of the buses that ran there in the 1960s and 70s. They would load these things up unbelievably. People stacked with all their goods. Animals even. I believe we were heading to Jalalabad in this picture, so the buses are all packed on their way. Next one. This is a shot of, this is the Blue Mosque, they called it in Kabul. There's more than one Blue Mosque in the country, but this gives you an idea of the outskirts of the country. If I remember correctly, I don't know if any of my old Peace Corps people are on, but I believe I'm looking down into the Russian compound there. The Russians had built a school, a compound down here, and I'm pretty sure that's what I'm looking at with the Blue Mosque up on. The Hindu Kush in the background, just amazing mountains behind you. Next. Washed out rainbow. I probably took a picture of that. This is a sort of a, I would say an example of a more prosperous house in Kabul at that time. You can see that they've got a courtyard, and you know, it's mud, brick, and concrete. Anyway, go to the next one. This is a shot of Kabul, the valley of Kabul, looking up on the mountainside, the Hindu Kush that rises above it, with an ancient wall that was built 1,500 years ago that runs along the ridge there. You can see, even though it's semi-desert, it was a lot of trees, beautiful, actually beautiful city when I was there. Unfortunately, a lot of it got bombed out, but you can see how the poor people live up the side of the mountain, and the trees sort of disappear up there where it's drier. Next. I had to put this one in. This is me at 21 in front of my place, an apartment where I lived. I only had 2 T-shirts to my name because when I was on my way, I packed a few duds in a day pack, and then put everything else in a great big pack, all of my clothing and everything else that I needed. And when I got to Kabul, the only thing I had was my day pack, and they did not ship my big pack. And they never did get it there. I spent the whole summer, I had to go native and buy native clothes. I had like 2 T-shirts. This one I bought in Germany on the way. And eventually when I got back to the United States, it did show up in the lost luggage area in Chicago, a city that I hadn't even passed through. So it was kind of a strange deal. I think that's all there are there, I believe.
Awesome.
Yeah, well, there's more, but those were the ones I thought would come out.
Oh, that's cool.
Scan. So I was equipped with a good camera, but I wasn't a great photographer.
Yeah. I can't do photos either because I'm too busy looking at stuff and not thinking about photos.
Yeah, that was kind of the case with me there. And to this day, I wish I would have taken more pictures of people and less of scenery. You always, I think people forget, especially beginning photographers, what you'll want to remember is the people, not that you could buy a postcard of the scenery, you know.
Yeah, and it's much more dynamic and it changes, right?
Yeah, I did.
I mean, a building looks the same.
I did have a few pictures of some of my Peace Corps friends, but I didn't get their okay to post those for this, so I thought maybe I shouldn't. We did have a few parties over there, and I'm sure some will wonder and maybe even ask the question, well, how much of the Kabul Conscript was based on, fact? How much of it? I have to say this: it's completely fictional. It's all made up, except for a couple of things. There's a scene in the book that is a party, and we did throw up a going away party one night that was I definitely drew on my memories and what little of my journal about that particular scene. And the characters that I built up were a combination of people I just dreamt up, and in some cases they were 2 or 3 personalities that I jumbled together to create a character. So there's, I just want to make the disclaimer that it is absolutely fictional, yet absolutely grounded in the reality of what I know of the history and politics of that time. So yeah. Super
awesome.
Yeah, well
maybe I've asked enough probing questions, because we ought to do the Q&A thing here at some point too, and I've pretty well
yeah, well, hopefully they have a few questions for us, and we didn't just blab so much that great. I want to thank Jay for helping me out with this, because you've asked some questions. Now I got to scratch my head and think about what was it.
Well, good. I guess they were good questions then. Hopefully they were coherent.
Yes.
I love those photos too. My favorite photo is the one of you in your Munchen t-shirt.
Yeah.
Munchen. But I do also the cityscape, where you do see the city down below, and then you see the residences on the residences on the mountain almost look like they are growing, like they came from the mountain, like they sprouted from, they're so blended.
They're organic looking. And I want to give a shout out to Kenzie, who did the cover for both of my books. She caught that, and if you look, I don't know if you can see, but if you look closely at the cover of the Kabul Conscript, you can see she blended in a sort of cubistic version of those going up the mountain there in the bandana around the young well, we called them WTs, world travelers, which was a disparaging term that they used for sort of hippies or beatniks that were traveling, and all the respectable people called those people WTs, with a sort of a looking down at the same time. And she got that. I think she did a wonderful job, and she was a graduate of Western Washington. And I just want to get, if you're there, Kenzie, shout out for these great covers. So.
Yeah, the cover art is beautiful. I
so
agree.
for the covers, if nothing else, right?
Right. Which I would say I have bought many, many fabulous books in my life based on their covers. So we do have some questions for you.
Oh, you do? Okay. I haven't been following very closely here, so.
Well, there's, I feel like maybe one of them, the first question, you might have touched on a little bit, but it says, I am interested in your personal experiences in Afghanistan and how it affected your writing.
I touched on that, although, like I said, it's not, there is nothing that is factual except the setting and the history, which I not only experienced, but I deeply researched. And I also got a hold of one of my old friends who had been there with me from that cycle. They call the Peace Corps things cycles. We were, I think, cycle 15. He lives back east, and he corrected me on a few things when I was describing parts of the city, and reminded me of some things that had happened there, pointed me in some good directions. I got to say thanks, Keith Hildebrand, for keeping me honest on a couple of things. But yes, all the characters are entirely fictional. The Afghan woman in particular is totally made up. The story, oh shoot, to get into the book a little bit more, there are several characters that I created from 3 or 4 different Peace Corps guys I knew or women that I knew, and I jumbled them all up together and came up with a completely different person. They probably won't even recognize themselves in there. So.
Okay. Another question is, I think this question popped up after you were talking about the sea being a character and place being its own character. Another Mike wants to know, have you ever thought about a ship as a living being akin to a human?
I think every sailor that has spent any time on a boat that he loved, a boat that responded, a boat that he'd grown used to, has thought of that way. And of course, sailors traditionally name their boats after women. And, you know, there's something to that. There's a partnership with your boat. The boat becomes, the boat I built, obviously I had so much time invested in that, I felt like it was at times a part of me. And then when I sold that boat and bought a great design called an Albert 37, definitely at times I felt like that boat could almost anticipate my thoughts. It's an uncanny thing. They're different than car. I know some people love their T-Birds or Corvettes or Porsches or whatever, but there's something about a boat on the water because you're so exposed and you depend so much on your craft. Yes, that's perspective. That's exactly correct. Yeah.
And Jay, did you want to add anything about that?
Oh, I would say without a doubt.
Yeah.
I mean, there's probably 20,000 years of lived experience of seafaring epigenetic tradition in most of us that is carrying that motif forward. So easy.
Yeah, definitely.
And so Mike, right now you're working on a nonfiction piece. And so Jay, are you currently writing? Do you have a project?
Oh man, maybe, but it's
You knew you would be asked that, didn't you?
Yeah, I haven't done any writing in quite a while because I've been tied into other things, and most of my material has been more essay form or just instructional. And I would say that artistic or expressional writing is not something I've had the opportunity to indulge in much in the past. However, I have a rekindled interest in that, so maybe I will get
We
the guts
talked
to
about
try.
an idea you had, and I think you should.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. I may have some
Whoop.
work is going to be a little slow, although adequate. So that it takes leisure time to do this stuff to some degree, right?
Mhm.
So I've not been too leisurely there for the last few years, but I may have some time now. So we'll see how it goes.
I'm
Okay.
trying to encourage him to write up this one particular fictional idea he's had.
Yeah, it's fiction.
I think it'd be great.
Yeah, it's a possibility.
Well, another question for you, Jay, is you said that you like to read, or maybe your writing has been informed, or reading has been informed by older works, classic works, because you get a better sense of historical context.
Yes.
Can you think of any contemporary authors that you feel like get close? That's putting you on the spot big time.
Well, I mean, I read pretty. I mean, fiction. You think? I'm less satisfied with fiction. I think,
Okay.
but I would say that I think there is a growing response to maybe postmodernist philosophy, which I admire a lot of postmodern philosophy, of course, but but toward away from a very relativistic and kind of immediately contextual way of looking at things to a deeper, long view. So I would say a writer that I have recently come away from with a lot of respect for is the Jungian scholar Peter Kingsley, who is actually also an antiquities scholar. And it's interesting to me because I have an interest in psychology. To go through the works of Jung in particular with an adequate understanding of the historic context that Jung himself was aware of, because we don't actually get much of that when we think of Jung as a therapist.
I got most of my Jung through Joseph Campbell, I think.
Well, that's a better source for sure. But often we have a tendency to think of his work as is kind of a Freudian influence exercise in therapy. And Kingsley, I think, does a better job really seeing that the Jungian experience is an extension of a cultural thread that started with Parmenides and persisted through the Middle Ages as Orpheism or Neo-Pythagoreanism or Hermeticism or Gnosticism up through the Middle Ages, and it's a continuation of a contrary theme read in that manner, and it's quite interesting to go through that. It's well documented.
And you'll see now, you get an idea why Jay isn't so much writing fiction at the moment.
Right.
Well, I mean, if I was going to write fiction, this stuff is important to it. So, like,
of course,
I don't like to just make a bunch of crap up.
Questions about my subconscious.
Well, I think your questions were great. They were atypical of what people usually ask the author. And
I hope so.
It gave us a deeper look into your books, Mike. And I think that was good. And so I think this was a great conversation. And I appreciate you both for participating. I want to know if anybody in the audience, if you have any final questions. We just got about a few minutes left.
Three questions there, but maybe you already asked.
They have been addressed.
Okay,
yes.
Good.
So
the only other thing I could maybe add to this is when you. Oh no, I guess I already said that earlier. Be sure that. I want people to know that are from out of state or not in the area that Village Books, for $1, will ship your book anywhere. Well, anywhere in the U.S. So
it's true. It's true.
And if you're not going to get it from Village Books, then get it from your local bookstore, because bookstores like Village Books are supporting authors, local authors, and and keeping it going. And winter's coming, and everybody's going to read a lot, right? I mean, I know I am. So.
Yep, and all of our copies have been signed by the author. So, well, I'm yours have. We don't. Not, Jay's have not been signed, but but Mike's.
Right.
Who the heck is signing my books? Is what
I forgot.
Somebody with better handwriting.
Wow. Well, this has been a lot of fun. And I want to thank everybody, the friends and the family that are in the audience, anybody who doesn't know this guy at all. Thank you for tuning in. That's wonderful. This is going to be this is a recorded event. It's going to be here on Crowdcast. You can access it anytime. It's also on YouTube. So so thanks everybody. And final thoughts, final words.
Thank you for the opportunity.
And thanks for doing such a nice job moderating. And once again, thanks Village Books, and thank everybody that turned out to watch and listen to us talk about literature, which is, hey, I think it's a great thing to talk about.
Yep. All right. Be safe, everybody, and vote.
Wear your masks.
Wear those masks, and thank you very much. I guess we're gonna say over and out.